Ancient architects coordinated construction projects that spanned hundreds of years. This video will decode the intricate planning sequences behind multi-phase temple development. You will learn to see these sacred sites as dynamic stories written in stone, not just static ruins. How did generations of builders maintain a single vision without modern tools? What grand ideas were so important they had to be preserved for centuries? How does a civilization express its deepest beliefs across the ages? By the end, you will understand the sophisticated methods that created architectural harmony over immense time frames. We will uncover the clues hidden in geometry, alignment, and material that reveal their master plans. What does it take to build for a future you will never see? A perfect circle, a square within a square, every line and angle humming with a hidden mathematical order. This is the silent language of sacred geometry, the master blueprint whispered from one generation of temple builders to the next. Before a single stone was ever laid, the entire complex existed as an intricate geometric idea, a cosmic diagram made physical. Planners used universal principles like the golden ratio and the Fibonacci sequence, patterns found in swirling galaxies and unfurling fern fronds, to design spaces that felt inherently balanced and peaceful to those who entered. This was not merely decorative, it was foundational. It created a visual and spiritual harmony so powerful that a structure built 500 years after the original would feel like a natural extension of it. Think of it as a shared architectural language. A master planner could provide a geometric template, a set of proportional rules, and different construction teams, separated by decades, could independently execute their portion of the grand vision. They all spoke the same mathematical dialect. At the sprawling complex of Angkor Wat, this principle is etched into the very stone. The alignment of its towers, the spacing of its galleries, all adhere to a strict, repeating geometric pattern that guided its expansion over centuries. Why would ancient cultures invest such immense effort into this invisible framework? It suggests they saw the universe itself as ordered by mathematics, and building a temple was their way of creating a small piece of that cosmic order on Earth, a sacred echo of the harmony they perceived in the stars. This geometric code is the first major clue in decoding their long-term plan. But a geometric blueprint is only one part of the story. To understand the full timeline, we turn to the Earth itself. Archaeologists carefully remove layers of soil, revealing a physical history written in stone and mortar. Each new construction phase sits directly on top of the last, creating a vertical timeline of a society's ambitions. This is chronological layering, a tangible record of how a sacred site grew and changed. At the vast city of Teotihuacan in Mexico, the mighty Pyramid of the Sun is not a single monument but a series of 6 smaller pyramids, each one enveloping its predecessor like a set of nesting boxes. Every new layer was a conscious decision, a massive building campaign that respected the original orientation and sacred core. So how do we read this stone calendar? Researchers use stratigraphic analysis, which is simply the science of reading the order of layers, combined with scientific methods like carbon dating on organic materials trapped within the mortar. This allows them to distinguish one construction phase from another, separating events that might be centuries apart. Why would a civilization repeatedly rebuild its most important structures? The layers tell stories of a growing population needing a larger space for gathering, or of a new leader seeking to leave a mark while honoring tradition, or of evolving spiritual ideas that required a modified physical setting. The challenge lies in weaving together these different threads of evidence, matching architectural styles with precise dates from historical records and laboratory results. Each layer is a chapter, asking us to consider what prompted that generation to build upon the legacy they inherited. By examining this chronological stack, we begin to reconstruct the ancient decision-making process, witnessing how a long-term vision was adapted across the unending flow of time. The same mathematical precision that shaped the temples on the ground also pointed their axes toward the heavens. Long before modern instruments, ancient priests stood in temple courtyards, tracing the paths of stars and planets across the night sky. They noted how the sun's position at the summer solstice would perfectly frame a doorway in light, or how a specific star would appear directly over a central altar on a sacred day. This was not random observation, it was a deliberate guiding principle. Across the world, from the temples of Egypt to the pyramids of Mesoamerica, complexes were oriented with breathtaking accuracy toward celestial events like solstices, equinoxes, and the rising of significant stars. These structures became cosmic calendars in stone, their alignments maintained with remarkable consistency across centuries of construction. At Stonehenge in England, the alignment toward the summer solstice sunrise was preserved through multiple phases of rebuilding over more than 1,000 years. This tells us that the ritual importance of that celestial moment was so profound that every generation of builders felt compelled to honor it. How was such precision possible without our modern tools? It required a deep generational knowledge of the sky, passed down through oral traditions and precise surveying techniques. Builders used simple but effective tools like gnomons, which are basically stakes that cast shadows, and sighting lines to track the sun's movement and establish true north. This knowledge was so critical it became part of the master plan itself, a non-negotiable element that ensured each new addition to the temple complex would continue to connect earthly worship with the grand cycles of the cosmos. By integrating these celestial patterns, the planners were creating more than just buildings. They were building a model of the universe, a sacred space where human activity and natural rhythms were perfectly synchronized. Recognizing these connections reveals a planning sequence deeply rooted in a desire to mirror the heavens on earth, a vision so powerful it could guide a building project for a millennium. Flowing through the very heart of these stone mountains was another kind of lifeblood, water. Intricate networks of channels and reservoirs transformed temple complexes into hydrological marvels, where every drop was guided with intention. This was not an afterthought, it was a crucial planning consideration from the very beginning, a sophisticated system designed to control the destructive power of monsoon floods, provide pure water for ritual purification, and create serene reflective pools that doubled the beauty of the architecture. The practical and the spiritual were woven together in a single, flowing design. At the vast Angkor complex in Cambodia, this vision unfolded over centuries. An extensive grid of canals and massive reservoirs, known as barrays, were developed first. Later temples were then strategically positioned to utilize this existing hydrological infrastructure, their placement dictated by the flow of water as much as by the stars. How did these water systems influence the very layout of the complex? The answer lies in advanced geological surveys. Planners would have studied the land's natural contours, the flow of seasonal rivers, and the underlying water table. They designed their channels and reservoirs to work in harmony with these natural patterns, not against them. This required a deep, localized understanding of hydrology that was passed down through generations of engineers. A new temple gate might be aligned not just to a solstice sunrise, but also to the main ceremonial causeway that crossed the primary reservoir. The constant, reliable supply of water enabled these centers to support large populations of priests, artisans, and pilgrims, turning a sacred site into a thriving holy city. By examining this hydraulic engineering, we uncover another layer of the master plan, one that saw water not as a threat to be controlled, but as a sacred element to be welcomed, channeled, and integrated into a living, breathing spiritual landscape. These symbolic pathways transformed the very ground into a spiritual map. Worshippers did not simply arrive at a temple, they embarked on a carefully choreographed journey, moving through a landscape designed to mirror the cosmos. Long, straight processional avenues, flanked by rows of protective statues, connected multiple temples into a single, unified ritual experience. At the heart of Egypt's Karnak temple complex, the magnificent avenue of sphinxes stretched for nearly 2 miles, linking the main temple with Luxor Temple. This was not just a road, it was a ceremonial stage, used during the Grand Opet festival when the statues of the gods were carried in procession, renewing the connection between the divine and the royal. The placement of these pathways was the ultimate act of long-term planning. They established the primary axes for future expansion, a skeletal framework upon which centuries of construction would hang. When a new pharaoh decided to add a temple, its location was often chosen to extend or complement this existing processional route, ensuring the ritual journey grew longer and more elaborate with each generation. The sequence of spaces along these routes was deeply symbolic. A pilgrim might move from an open, sun-drenched courtyard through a dim, columned hall, and finally into a small, dark sanctuary. This physical progression from light to dark, from public to profoundly private, mirrored spiritual concepts of moving from the worldly into the presence of the divine. Every step was part of the story. Planners considered everything from the gentle slope of the ground underfoot to the strategic framing of sightlines, ensuring that at key moments a specific tower or gateway would come into view, marking a pilgrim's progress. How might these ceremonial pathways have influenced the development of surrounding urban areas? They often became the central arteries of entire cities, with markets, workshops, and homes growing organically along these sacred corridors, tying the daily life of the community directly to its spiritual heartbeat. To walk these paths today is to understand that these complexes were not just collections of beautiful buildings, but dynamic landscapes of movement and transformation, where the simple act of walking became a powerful form of prayer. The sheer weight of the stones tells a story of its own. While the celestial alignments and geometric plans defined the temple spiritually, their physical reality depended on a massive, coordinated effort to move mountains of stone. Workers in distant quarries, using simple copper chisels and stone hammers, would carefully extract blocks weighing many tons. The challenge was not just cutting the stone, but moving it across miles of difficult terrain to the sacred site. This logistical puzzle influenced the very sequence of construction, as builders had to secure their material supply lines for projects that would outlive them. At the Giza Plateau in Egypt, the same limestone quarries supplied material for pyramids built by successive pharaohs. This created a remarkable consistency in the appearance and quality of the stonework across generations, a visual harmony born from a shared resource. The availability of specific materials often dictated the timing of new phases. A new wing might be commissioned only after a successful expedition returned with rare cedar timber from distant mountains, or a particular type of granite prized for its durability and color. How did they move such immense weights without modern machinery? The methods were ingenious in their simplicity. Massive blocks were loaded onto wooden sledges and pulled over specially prepared roads by large teams of workers. For water transport, they used barges, floating the stones down rivers during the flood season when the water was high. These were not random acts of brute force, but calculated engineering feats that required precise knowledge of physics, seasonal weather patterns, and human coordination. Ramps of packed earth and rubble growing alongside the rising structure allowed workers to haul stones to incredible heights. This complex dance of sourcing and transportation required a robust administrative system, one capable of planning years in advance, organizing thousands of laborers, and managing the flow of materials so that the work never stalled. When a particular stone became scarce, it often forced a creative shift in architectural style. A planner might choose to use a locally available sandstone instead of a distant granite, leading to new decorative techniques or structural forms that later became defining features of the complex. The limitations of the material world became a catalyst for innovation, pushing ancient engineers to find smarter, more efficient ways to realize a vision meant to last for eternity. A new ruler's first act was often not a declaration of war, but a decree to build. For a pharaoh, an emperor, or a regional king, the expansion of a temple complex was a powerful statement of legitimacy, a way to demonstrate divine favor while physically stamping their authority onto the spiritual landscape. They were engaging in a delicate dance, needing to show respect for the sacred traditions of their predecessors, while also making their own indelible mark. The sprawling Madurai Meenakshi temple in India stands as a perfect example of this layered history. Over centuries, successive dynasties, from the Pandyan to the Nayak rulers, added magnificent gateways, expansive halls, and elaborate shrines. Each addition respected the temple's original core layout and central deities, yet each also introduced the distinct artistic styles and engineering prowess of its own era. The result is not a chaotic jumble, but a harmonious palimpsest where one can read the story of rising and falling kingdoms in the stone. Inscriptions carved into pillars and walls often serve as direct testimony, royal decrees frozen in time that detail why a specific hall was commissioned or a new gateway was deemed necessary. These texts reveal that construction was not just an act of devotion, but a calculated tool of statecraft. A new dynasty, particularly one that came to power through conflict or negotiation, faced the immediate challenge of securing the loyalty of the people. What faster way to gain acceptance than by aligning yourself with the most revered site in the realm? By funding a magnificent new addition to a beloved temple, a ruler could present themselves not as a foreign conqueror, but as a pious protector and a worthy successor to a long line of kings. This political necessity could dramatically accelerate construction. A period of stable, prosperous rule might see slow, deliberate expansion, while a sudden political transition could trigger a flurry of building activity as a new leader sought to quickly cement their legacy. The very design of these additions reflected the political climate. In times of strong central authority, architects might feel empowered to introduce bold innovations, confident in the royal backing. During periods of uncertainty or weaker leadership, builders often clung more closely to traditional, established forms, using architecture to project an image of unbroken stability. Understanding this dimension transforms our view of these spaces. We begin to see them not just as isolated sanctuaries, but as active participants in the political theater of their age, where every new column raised was both an act of faith and a strategic move in the eternal game of power. The precise choreography of a ceremony could dictate the very walls that contained it. Priests moved through spaces designed not just for beauty, but for function, where the angle of the sun at dawn on a holy day would illuminate a single statue, or where the acoustics of a hall would amplify a sacred chant into an overwhelming, resonant force. These ritual requirements were a powerful, often hidden, engine driving architectural evolution across generations. At the heart of Greece's Eleusinian mysteries, a site sacred for nearly 2,000 years, we see this principle in action. The initiation rites performed there were a profound secret, and the architecture itself was modified over centuries to protect that secrecy while accommodating growing numbers of participants. The core spiritual experience, the moment of revelation, had to remain unchanged, and so the buildings were reshaped around it, creating a shell that preserved an eternal center. This need for specific conditions influenced everything. The positioning of an altar was not arbitrary. It was calculated so that the smoke from offerings would rise through a precisely oriented opening in the roof. A processional path might be widened not for convenience, but to allow for a new ritual dance that required more space for the movement of ordained individuals. Even the acoustics were engineered, with builders subtly angling stone walls to carry the sound of a whispered prayer or the ringing of a bell to every corner of a courtyard, ensuring that everyone present, from the high priest to the newest initiate, could share in the same auditory experience. How did these sacred sites manage to evolve without losing their original spiritual power? The answer lies in a deep architectural conservatism. When a temple was completely rebuilt, often on a grander scale, the builders would meticulously preserve its most ritually significant elements. The ancient altar stone, the sacred spring, the specific spot where a divine event was believed to have occurred, these were always incorporated into the new, more elaborate structure. They were the unmovable anchors of faith around which everything else was designed. This created a fascinating tension between tradition and innovation. A new dynasty might introduce a stunningly novel architectural style, but they would still ensure that the axis of prayer, the direction faced by the congregation during key ceremonies, remained perfectly aligned with the original temple's orientation. Changing religious beliefs were often accommodated by adding new chapels or shrines to the periphery of the established complex, expanding the spiritual landscape without disturbing the holy core. The temple complex was not a static museum, but a living, breathing entity that grew and adapted to the changing heartbeat of the faith it served, all while holding fast to the sacred rhythms that gave it life in the first place. But the grandest vision is only as stable as the earth it stands upon. Ancient engineers faced a constant, invisible adversary, the slow, relentless pull of gravity. To build higher and wider across generations, they had to become masters of the ground beneath their feet, developing sophisticated foundation systems that would serve as a stable platform for centuries of future construction. At the breathtaking Borobudur Temple in Indonesia, the solution to this challenge is hidden from view. The entire massive stone pyramid, a mountain of carved volcanic rock, rests upon an intricate foundation of interlocking stone layers and a carefully compacted earth core. This system was not merely a base, it was an active defense against subsidence, designed to distribute the immense weight evenly and prevent the structure from sinking into the soft ground. This initial, monumental investment in stability was what made all later additions possible, a gift of foresight from the first builders to those who would follow. The evolution of support is written in the walls themselves. Early structures might rely on thick, solid walls for strength, but as builders grew more confident, they began to incorporate elegant buttresses and graceful arches. These elements did more than just hold up a roof, they redirected the forces of weight and pressure, allowing for taller ceilings, larger open spaces, and more delicate columns. Each new phase of construction was an opportunity to learn from the past, to see which walls had cracked under stress, and which arches had proven strongest. How did they know the land could support such ambition? The evidence lies in foundation trenches and core samples extracted from the soil. These modern investigations reveal that ancient engineers performed their own rudimentary soil tests, digging deep to understand the composition of the earth and adapting their techniques accordingly. They might layer gravel for drainage in a wet area or drive wooden piles deep into unstable ground to reach a more solid stratum. The most delicate engineering challenge came when attaching a new hall or gateway to an existing, centuries-old structure. This was not a simple matter of butting two walls together. It required a profound understanding of load distribution. Builders had to ensure that the weight of the new addition would not inadvertently weaken the older building, potentially causing a crack or even a collapse. They achieved this through clever design, often using corbelled arches that stepped outward to gradually transfer the load, or by constructing independent foundation systems for new sections that merely leaned against rather than burdened the ancient walls. This constant negotiation with physical limits directly shaped the architecture we admire today. the need for stronger support might lead to the invention of a new column design, which then became a fashionable element repeated throughout the complex. A shortage of long, durable timber for roof beams could force a shift to stone vaulting, creating a new aesthetic of shadow and mass. What we see as beautiful stylistic evolution was often the direct result of ingenious engineering, a testament to the problem-solving brilliance of planners who were building not just for their own time, but for a future they trusted their foundations to hold. The hands that carved the final gateway might belong to the grandson of the man who laid the first stone. This generational relay of craftsmanship created an artistic legacy where style itself became a language of continuity. Master sculptors working within guild systems trained their apprentices not just in technique, but in a specific visual vocabulary. They passed down the precise curvature of a lotus petal, the standard proportions for a deity's form, and the exact method for rendering drapery folds in stone. This ensured that a statue carved 50 years after its counterpart would feel like a sibling, not a stranger, maintaining a cohesive artistic identity across a project that no single person would ever see completed. At the heart of Cambodia's Angkor Thom, the Bayon Temple presents a stunning evolution. Its iconic, serene-faced towers gazing out from every direction represent a distinct stylistic departure from the more refined, narrative bas-reliefs of the earlier Angkor Wat. Yet this innovation was built upon a foundation of profound continuity. The artisans used the same locally quarried sandstone, employed the same masterful carving techniques, and adhered to the same underlying principles of sacred geometry. The style evolved, but the artistic soul remained recognizably Khmer. How did these communities balance the need for tradition with the natural impulse for innovation? The sequencing of decorative programs provides a clue. Across a vast complex, the sculptural narrative often unfolded like a storybook carved in stone. One temple might depict the creation myths, while another, built a generation later, would illustrate the epic journeys of gods and heroes. This allowed for stylistic shifts between structures without creating visual conflict, as each building held its own chapter of a grander tale. The artistic choices themselves became signals. A new ruler seeking to legitimize their reign might deliberately commission artwork in a slightly older, revered style to connect their rule to a golden age of the past. Conversely, a confident, prosperous dynasty might introduce a bold new aesthetic, using art to proclaim a vibrant, contemporary identity while still respecting the sanctity of the core religious icons. This delicate dance between the old and the new reflects the broader cultural dynamics of a civilization in slow, constant motion. By reading these artistic layers, we see the temple not as a frozen moment in time, but as a living cultural expression, its walls recording the subtle shifts in taste, belief, and identity that unfolded over the unending flow of centuries. The mountain itself was the first temple. Ancient planners did not simply build on the land, they built with it, listening to the whispers of the terrain and weaving their stone creations into the very fabric of the natural world. This was a sacred conversation between human ambition and the enduring landscape, where a flowing stream or a distinctive peak became a co-architect in the grand design. At Peru's Machu Picchu, this philosophy is breathtakingly clear. The entire complex is a masterpiece of integration, its temples and terraces carefully shaped to follow the sharp spine of the mountain ridge. The most important structures are precisely aligned with the surrounding peaks, which were themselves considered sacred beings or apus. The planners did not level the mountain to suit their blueprint, they allowed the mountain's own form to dictate the blueprint itself. This deep respect for the existing environment fundamentally shaped the sequence of construction. The first step was always a profound observation of the site. Where did the sun rise on the winter solstice? From which direction did the seasonal storms arrive? Where did the purest water emerge from the earth? The answers to these questions determined where the first foundation stones would be laid. A natural spring would be enclosed and sanctified, becoming the heart of the complex. A peculiarly shaped rock outcrop would be left untouched, later to be carved into a central altar. This was not random. It was a deliberate strategy to harness the inherent spiritual power of a place. The orientation of doorways and windows was a careful calculation of light and shadow. A builder might design a corridor so that the sun's rays, only on the morning of the summer solstice, would travel its entire length to illuminate a golden statue in the inner chamber. This created a celestial clock in stone, marking the passage of the year with a dramatic play of light that required no human intervention. How did this relationship with the environment influence the development timeline? A new shrine might be added decades later, not because of a royal decree, but because a nearby cave was discovered to have remarkable acoustic properties, making it the perfect new site for oracle rituals. The preservation of sacred groves within temple walls shows that nature was not cleared away, but invited inside, becoming an essential component of the spiritual experience. This holistic approach reveals a planning philosophy that saw no separation between the divine in the heavens, the divine in the built structure, and the divine in the living landscape. The temple was not an imposition upon the world, but a graceful and intentional extension of it, a collaboration between generations of builders and the eternal earth they called home. The ambition to build for centuries required a foundation of immense and sustained wealth. A temple's walls rose not just from stone, but from the labor of thousands, the bounty of vast farmlands, and the flow of goods along trade routes stretching to the horizon. This was a massive economic engine, one that had to remain productive across generations to fuel the sacred vision. At Egypt's Karnak temple, construction spanned nearly 2,000 years, a timeline made possible only by a robust, flexible economy. The temple itself was a major landowner with estates and farms that produced a constant agricultural surplus. This surplus, collected as taxes and offerings, paid for everything from the daily wages of stonemasons to the food that fed the army of laborers. The rhythm of construction pulsed in time with the kingdom's prosperity. A new pylon or a grand new courtyard was almost always a sign of a bountiful Nile flood, a successful military campaign that brought in tribute, or a long period of stable, peaceful rule. Inscriptions on the temple walls themselves often tell this story, recording donations from wealthy merchants, grateful farmers, and of course, the pharaohs themselves, each funding a specific gateway or hall, etching their contribution into eternity. How was such a complex workforce managed over such immense timescales? The answer lies in a sophisticated administrative class. Scribes kept meticulous records of materials, rations, and work schedules, while foremen coordinated teams of specialized craftsmen, from quarrymen and sculptors to painters and carpenters. These skilled workers often lived in dedicated villages near the construction site. Their trades passed from father to son, creating dynasties of artisans who served the temple for generations. This long-term project did more than just consume resources. It actively stimulated the entire regional economy. The constant demand for stone, timber, metals, and food created stable markets and encouraged technological innovation in mining, transportation, and agriculture. Roads were built to transport stone, ports were expanded to receive cedar wood from distant lands, and irrigation systems were improved to feed the growing population of workers. A period of intense temple building could transform a quiet religious site into a thriving economic hub, attracting traders, farmers, and craftsmen from across the kingdom. This intricate dance between spiritual ambition and economic reality reveals the temple not as an isolated sanctuary, but as the vibrant, beating heart of a civilization's wealth. Its rising walls a direct reflection of the prosperity and organizational genius of the society that built it. Sometimes the stones themselves speak, but occasionally we find the voices of the planners preserved in their own words. etched into pillars and foundation stones, ancient inscriptions serve as direct testimony, a detailed logbook of a temple's long journey from vision to reality. At India's magnificent Brihadiswara temple, the walls are covered with inscriptions that meticulously record the entire construction process. They name the master architect, the lead sculptor, and even the official in charge of sourcing sand. These are not just random carvings, they are a comprehensive administrative record, providing a near chronological account of how this colossal project was sequenced and managed. The very act of inscribing this information into the temple's permanent fabric reveals a profound planning consciousness, a deliberate desire to communicate the story of its creation to future generations. But reading these ancient messages is a complex art. Scholars must first understand the historical context, the specific dating systems used, and the cultural conventions of the time. An inscription celebrating a king's generosity might use regnal years, counting time from his coronation, while a record from a merchant guild might use a local calendar. Translating the words is only the first step. Interpreting their true purpose is the real challenge. Was the text meant as a simple administrative record, a devotional offering to the gods, or a political statement designed to bolster a ruler's legacy? Each purpose would shape how the story was told. A royal inscription might exaggerate the speed of construction to project an image of divine efficiency, while a donor's humble record might focus on the piety of the act rather than the timeline. By comparing inscriptions across different temples, researchers can start to see broader patterns emerge. They might notice that gateways were almost always the final element to be completed in a South Indian temple complex, or that water tanks were typically among the first structures consecrated. These patterns point to a shared, unwritten manual of construction sequencing that was understood across vast regions and centuries. Yet for all they reveal, these written sources are also defined by their silences. Gaps in the record, whether from wear, damage, or simply because something was never written down, force historians to turn detective. They must cross-reference the inscriptions with the architectural evidence, using the style of a carving or the mortar composition between stones to fill in the missing chapters of the story. Why would a community choose to record some details with such painstaking care while leaving others unmentioned? The answer often lies in what the society valued most. The names of the king and the high priest were sacred, worthy of eternity, while the names of the thousands of laborers who moved the stones were often considered part of the anonymous backdrop of history. These inscriptions give us a direct line to the ancient mind, but they remind us that we are hearing a curated story, one that emphasizes certain voices and omits others, challenging us to listen carefully to both what is said and what is left gracefully unsaid. From the jungles of Cambodia to the highlands of Peru, a remarkable pattern emerges. Civilizations that never met, separated by oceans and millennia, all arrived at a similar architectural conclusion. The need to build sacred spaces that could grow over centuries was a challenge faced by cultures across the globe, and their responses reveal a shared human genius. The Maya at Tikal, the Khmer at Ankara, and the Greeks at Delphi all created sprawling temple complexes that evolved through distinct phases. They each prioritized celestial alignment, ensuring their pyramids and temples tracked the sun and stars with stunning accuracy. They all designed grand processional avenues that guided pilgrims on a transformative journey, and they each established systems for sourcing and working stone, creating a visual harmony that could last for generations. This points to universal principles in how humans conceive of sacred space, a common desire to connect earthly worship to the eternal rhythms of the cosmos through architecture. Yet within this shared framework, the variations are just as telling. The specific geometric patterns used, the preferred materials, and the symbolic language carved into every surface were deeply rooted in local cosmology and belief. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, planned with the certainty of the Nile's annual flood, their construction cycles tied to its life-giving rhythm. In contrast, the Maya in the rainforest developed complex water management systems to capture and store rainfall, their architectural timelines shaped by a very different relationship with their environment. These differences were not a matter of superiority, but of brilliant adaptation. The available technology also left its mark. A culture with access to iron tools could work stone in ways that were impossible for a civilization still in its Bronze Age, leading to different decorative programs and structural possibilities. The true wonder lies in how these diverse cultures, working with different tools and beliefs, all managed to solve the same core puzzle. How do you maintain a single vision across the unending flow of time? The answer often lay in a powerful combination of a master geometric plan and a robust system of apprenticeship, ensuring that the knowledge of how to build was passed down as faithfully as the spiritual reasons for building. This raises a fascinating question about cultural contact. While the great civilizations of the Americas and Asia developed in isolation, trade routes across the Mediterranean and the Silk Road undoubtedly facilitated an exchange of ideas. Could a Greek architectural concept have traveled to India to be reinterpreted in a local temple? It is possible, but the profound similarities suggest something even more fundamental. They hint at a shared human intuition for creating order, meaning, and legacy in stone, a universal language of sacred space that we are only now beginning to fully decode. A grand vision requires a master plan, a guiding document that could outlive its creators. While we might picture rolled papyrus or clay tablets, the evidence for these ancient blueprints is often etched into the landscape itself. At the heart of Angkor, the vast reservoir system and the central temple mountains of Angkor Wat and the Bayon are not randomly placed. They form a deliberate, large-scale pattern, a sacred diagram of the Hindu cosmos, with the temple mountains representing the home of the gods and the surrounding water channels symbolizing the cosmic ocean. This was not a series of independent projects. It was a single, sprawling composition executed over 500 years, a testament to a plan so powerful it could coordinate the work of countless kings and architects. How was such a complex design communicated across the centuries? The methods were as diverse as the cultures themselves. In some places, master architects used precise scale models made of wood or clay, three-dimensional guides that could be studied and copied by successive generations of builders. In others, the knowledge was preserved through an oral tradition, a sacred song or a recited poem that encoded the critical measurements and alignments within its verses. The most enduring blueprint, however, was often the site itself. Planners would establish fixed points like a central shrine or a foundational stone and primary axes, such as the processional way we discussed. These became the permanent landmarks, the unchanging anchors of the entire design. A new builder, even 100 years later, would know that any new structure must align with this established east-west axis or maintain a specific proportional relationship to the central tower. This system created a remarkable balance between rigid structure and creative freedom. The master plan dictated the essential skeleton, the non-negotiable sacred geometry and primary sightlines, but it often left the flesh and blood, the decorative details and specific architectural styles, to the tastes and technologies of future generations. This adaptability was its greatest strength. If a new building technique was discovered, or if a political shift demanded a new type of ceremonial space, the planners could incorporate these changes without fracturing the overall harmony of the complex. The master plan was not a prison, but a living framework, a set of rules for a game that would be played for 1,000 years. It allowed a civilization to build with one unified voice, a chorus of countless generations all singing from the same sacred score. The stones had to endure more than just the passage of time. They faced the full force of the natural world, from torrential monsoon rains to the tremors of a restless earth. Ancient planners were not just architects and astronomers, they were early environmental engineers, weaving resilience directly into the long-term sequencing of their sacred sites. At Indonesia's Prambanan temple complex, this foresight is etched into the very alignment of the structures. The temples were built with a profound awareness of the region's seismic activity. Their builders employed a flexible mortar and interlocking stone techniques that allowed the entire complex to sway and settle during an earthquake rather than shatter, a brilliant adaptation that has helped it survive for over a millennium. This was a deliberate strategy for longevity, ensuring that the spiritual heart of the community could withstand the unpredictable challenges of its environment. Every element of design served a dual purpose, balancing practical necessity with ritual function. Sophisticated drainage channels carved along the base of walls and courtyards did more than just divert heavy rainfall. They transformed a potential deluge into a controlled, ceremonial flow, guiding water away from foundations in a way that echoed the purifying rituals performed within. Ventilation was another critical consideration. The precise positioning of windows and air shafts created natural cooling currents, drawing in breezes to ventilate inner sanctums and maintain a comfortable atmosphere for both worshippers and the delicate artworks housed inside. Even the choice of building stone was a calculated response to the climate. In humid regions, planners selected more porous materials that could breathe and resist moisture damage, while in areas with extreme temperature swings, they used thick, insulating stone to keep interior spaces cool by day and warm by night. How did these adaptations evolve across different construction phases? Later additions to a complex often showcase a refined understanding of local challenges. A newer temple gateway might feature a steeper roof pitch to shed rain more efficiently, or its foundation might be deeper and wider, a clear improvement based on lessons learned from observing how earlier structures had weathered decades of storms. This ongoing dialogue with the environment sometimes led to surprising stylistic shifts. An architectural feature that began as a purely practical solution, like a reinforced corner or a specific type of column base proven to resist settling, could gradually become a celebrated decorative motif, repeated and elaborated upon by later builders until it became a defining characteristic of the entire complex. The preservation of certain core elements, even when a temple was completely rebuilt, often points to their irreplaceable role in environmental adaptation. A particular altar's location might be maintained for centuries because it was naturally shielded from the prevailing winds, or a sacred pool might be meticulously relined in every new construction phase because it tapped into a reliable, perennial spring. This reveals that the spiritual significance of a place was often inseparable from its practical sustainability. How did planners account for the slow, creeping changes of a shifting climate over centuries? Modifications to water management systems are a clear indicator. A reservoir might be enlarged after a series of drier years, or new catchment basins added to capture every drop of a diminishing rainy season. The very orientation of a new hall could be adjusted slightly to provide more shade as sunlight patterns gradually changed. By reading these subtle architectural adjustments, we see a civilization in a long-term conversation with its home, continuously refining its sacred spaces to honor both the divine and the enduring realities of the world around them. Every step through a temple gate was a carefully designed psychological journey. The ancient architects were masters of the human mind, using space itself to choreograph a pilgrim's emotions from the moment they entered the sacred grounds. This was about far more than simple beauty. It was about engineering a spiritual transformation through a deliberate sequence of architectural experiences. At Egypt's Abu Simbel, the design is a powerful lesson in this principle. Visitors move from the overwhelming brightness of the desert sun into a series of halls that grow progressively darker and more confined, culminating in the deepest, most intimate sanctuary. This physical journey from the vast and public to the small and profoundly private was a psychological trigger, making a person feel as though they were leaving the mundane world behind and stepping closer to the divine presence. The very rhythm of the spaces guided this inner change. A wide, open courtyard would create a feeling of arrival and communal gathering, only to be followed by a narrow, towering gateway that focused the mind and compressed the crowd. Emerging from that gateway into a vast, forest-like hypostyle hall with its countless columns, produced a sense of awe and disorientation, breaking down a visitor's everyday sense of scale before they entered the final, hushed sanctuary. This careful alternation between compression and expansion, between light and shadow, was a universal tool in the planner's kit, found in traditions from the Greek mysteries to the Hindu temple. How did they ensure these psychological effects remained intact over centuries of construction? The answer lies in preserving the core sequence. When a new pharaoh added a larger courtyard or a more magnificent pylon at the front of the complex, the essential progression from open to closed, from light to dark, was never disrupted. The new additions simply extended the initial stages of the journey, making the final transition into the ancient, sacred core feel even more dramatic and significant. This experiential blueprint was as important as any geometric plan. Planners engaged all the senses to deepen the impact. The sound of one's footsteps would change from the echo of a stone plaza to the muffled quiet of a carpeted hall. The eye would be drawn down a long avenue by a series of towering obelisks, each one marking a stage in the pilgrimage. The hands might brush against cool, carved stone or smooth, polished wood, adding a tactile layer to the memory. Even smell was considered, with the fragrance of incense growing stronger as one moved inward, signaling the approach to the holiest space. This multi-sensory immersion ensured that the temple was not just seen but felt. It was a machine for shaping consciousness, built to guide every visitor through a predictable yet profound emotional arc, a testament to an ancient understanding that the path to the sacred was as much about psychological design as it was about spiritual devotion. The tools of the temple builders evolved as slowly and deliberately as the sacred structures themselves. For a project meant to span centuries, each technological breakthrough was not a disruption but a carefully integrated step forward, allowing the grand vision to grow in scale and sophistication without losing its foundational harmony. The very stonework tells this story of progress. In the earliest phases of a complex, you might find massive, roughly shaped blocks, fitted together with a strong but simple logic. As generations passed, the introduction of more durable metal tools allowed for a new level of precision. Iron chisels could cut stone with finer detail, enabling joints so tight that a knife blade could not slip between them. This was not merely an aesthetic improvement, it was a structural revolution. Tighter joints meant walls could bear more weight, allowing for taller, more open interiors and more daring architectural forms in later construction campaigns. The story of Rome's temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus is a powerful testament to this evolution. Rebuilt and expanded over centuries, each new incarnation of the temple respected the sacred footprint of its predecessor while boldly incorporating the latest engineering knowledge. The same hallowed ground witnessed a progression from simpler post and lintel construction to the sophisticated use of arches and vaults in later phases, all while maintaining the traditional form that held the community's faith. Imagine the challenge of moving a single, multi-ton column capital from a distant quarry to the temple site. Early builders might have relied on log rollers and immense teams of laborers, a slow and arduous process that naturally limited the size and quantity of stones they could use. The development of the wooden crane, powered by a massive treadmill wheel, was a transformative leap. It allowed a smaller team to lift and position massive stones to great heights, fundamentally changing what was architecturally possible. Later builders, armed with this new technology, could design taller gateways and more slender, elegant columns, knowing they had the means to assemble them. This progression raises a fascinating question. How did early technological limitations creatively shape the final form of a complex? A foundation laid with smaller stones might later prevent builders from erecting a truly colossal tower on that exact spot, forcing them to place a new, grander structure adjacent to the old core. The original, technologically constrained section would then become a revered, ancient heart, its modest scale preserved as a testament to the origins of the entire endeavor. The true key to this technological continuity was the guild system, where master craftsmen passed their hard-won knowledge to apprentices through years of hands-on training. A master mason would teach not just how to cut a dovetail joint, but why that specific joint had proven most resilient to winter frosts over decades of observation. This living library of practical engineering was the invisible scaffold upon which centuries of construction relied. It ensured that a technique perfected in one era would become the standard for the next, creating an unbroken chain of innovation that turned spiritual aspiration into enduring stone. The story of a temple is written in the earth, layer by deliberate layer. Beneath the grand monuments, archaeologists sift through soil and stone, reading the subtle lines of history to reconstruct the ancient sequence of construction. This is the science of stratigraphy, a methodical process of interpreting the vertical timeline of a site. By carefully recording the composition of each soil layer, the patterns of construction debris, and the precise cuts of foundation trenches, researchers can piece together the order in which walls were raised and courtyards were paved. It is a form of physical detective work that provides the crucial, tangible evidence for how a temple complex grew over centuries. At Jerusalem's Temple Mount, a site sacred to multiple faiths, this work is exceptionally complex. Excavations have revealed a palimpsest of history, with walls from the Roman period built upon foundations from the time of Herod, which in turn respected even earlier structures. Each phase is identified by distinct signatures in the masonry, the type of mortar used, and the artifacts like coins or pottery shards found trapped within the layers. A foundation trench cut through an older floor tells a clear story of renewal and change, while a wall carefully built to align with a pre-existing one speaks of respect for a revered tradition. The process involves more than just observing the layers. It requires analyzing their relationships. A pit dug into a layer must be younger than the layer itself. A floor that runs up against a wall indicates the wall was there first. By connecting these relative relationships with absolute dates from scientific methods like carbon dating of organic materials found in the mortar, a detailed chronology begins to emerge. This allows us to see not just when a new king built a grand gateway, but how his architects approached the legacy they inherited. Did they dismantle the old structure completely, using its stones as filler for new foundations? Or did they encase the ancient, holy site within a new, larger shell, preserving it like a sacred relic? The correlation of this physical evidence with surviving historical records, when they exist, creates a powerful synergy. An inscription naming a ruler might be found in a wall that stratigraphy shows was part of the third major building phase, allowing us to attach a specific name and date to a specific layer of stone. This meticulous methodology transforms a pile of ruins into a living narrative, helping us appreciate the painstaking work behind reconstructing the ancient mind, one carefully recorded layer at a time. The numbers themselves were considered sacred. Beyond the geometry of shapes lay a deeper code, the symbolic language of numerology, where specific numbers held divine power and cosmic meaning. This numerical blueprint dictated everything from the precise count of steps leading to the inner sanctuary to the repeating pattern of pillars in a hall. At the mountainous complex of Pre-Vihir in Cambodia, this principle unfolds with every step a visitor takes. The repetition of the number 5 in its pavilions and gateways is not a coincidence. It is a deliberate invocation, a rhythm etched in stone that connects each structure to a larger cosmological idea. These numbers were far more than measurements. They were the hidden syntax of a spiritual story, reflecting creation myths, the hierarchy of deities, and the very cycles of time. The preservation of these numerical relationships across centuries of construction is one of the most compelling testaments to their importance. When a temple was entirely rebuilt on a grander scale, the planners would meticulously ensure that the new structure retained the key numerical proportions of the old one. The number of chambers surrounding the central shrine, the count of steps on the main staircase, these sacred integers were treated as inviolable, the spiritual DNA of the site that had to be passed on intact. How did a master planner, centuries after the first stone was laid, know to maintain the same symbolic count? The answer lies in a sophisticated mathematical tradition, often preserved in sacred texts or within the closed circles of priestly architects. They used these numbers as a universal coordinate system. A later builder, even if working with a completely new architectural style, would know that any gateway leading to the inner court must have 7 lintels, or that a ceremonial bath must be fed by 8 waterspouts. This created a profound symbolic coherence, allowing a pilgrim to feel the same sacred rhythm whether they were in a hall built in the 10th century or one completed in the 13th. The integration of new structures into this existing numerical framework required more than just counting. It demanded a deep understanding of proportional harmony. Adding a new wing might require scaling its dimensions so that the total number of columns in the entire complex would still resolve into a spiritually significant number, like 108 or 360. This was a high-level mathematical puzzle, solved across generations. The numbers provided a stable, unambiguous framework for coordination, a set of rules so clear that they could guide the hands of builders who would never meet, ensuring that every addition continued to whisper the same ancient numerical prayer into the stones. The silent stones of these great complexes were raised by the voices and hands of thousands. Coordinating this immense human effort across the lifespan of many generations required a social machine as finely tuned as the celestial alignments guiding the architecture. The true foundation of a multi-phase temple was not just stone, but a sustainable system for recruiting, training, and sustaining a skilled labor force for a project no single person would see completed. At the village of Deir el-Medina in Egypt, built to house the artisans constructing the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings, we find a perfect microcosm of this generational organization. This was not a temporary camp, but a planned, permanent community with houses, wells, and administrative buildings, home to a dedicated guild of scribes, stonemasons, and painters. Their work was their legacy, passed from father to son in a closed system that preserved the highest standards of quality and the most sacred artistic secrets. This generational relay of craftsmanship was the invisible engine of architectural continuity. A master sculptor would train his apprentice not only in how to carve a hieroglyph, but in the precise style and proportion used by his own grandfather, ensuring that a statue carved 50 years later would feel like a sibling to the first. This created an unbroken chain of technique and tradition, a living library of skill that allowed the grand vision to remain coherent across centuries. The rhythm of construction itself was often tied to the land. Major building campaigns were frequently scheduled for the inundation season of the Nile, when the fields were underwater and the agricultural population was freed from farm labor. This seasonal influx of workers provided the massive manpower needed to haul the largest stones, while the core of specialized artisans remained year-round, maintaining the project's momentum and supervising the temporary crews. Supporting this vast workforce was a monumental administrative task. the state provided regular rations of grain, fish, vegetables, and even beer, along with tools and housing, effectively creating a salary system that freed workers to focus entirely on their sacred task. Scribes kept meticulous records of attendance, material deliveries, and work assignments, managing a logistics network that stretched from distant quarries to the temple walls. How did this intricate social organization influence the temple's development timeline? The answer lies in the pace of construction. A period of stable, prosperous rule with a well-funded and well-fed workforce could see rapid, ambitious expansion. Conversely, a time of political instability or poor harvests, when rations might be delayed or reduced, would inevitably slow the work, creating a visible pause in the archaeological record. The very sequence of construction could be dictated by labor availability. A pharaoh might choose to complete the easily achievable outer walls first, providing a sense of rapid progress for the populace, while reserving the intricate, time-consuming inner sanctum for the small, most trusted team of master craftsmen. This human infrastructure reveals that these temples were not just imposed upon the landscape by divine decree, but were the product of a complex, living society, a collaboration of countless known and unknown individuals whose daily lives were woven into the eternal stones they left behind. The divine itself was not a static idea, and the stones had to adapt. As a culture's understanding of the gods deepened or shifted, the very ground plans of their temples were redrawn to reflect this new spiritual reality. A sacred site was a living document of faith, its walls and altars recording subtle theological debates that unfolded over generations. At the Temple of Apollo at Delphi, this evolution is etched into the landscape. The core of the site, the sacred chasm where the priestess delivered her oracles, remained the Holy of Holies for over 1,000 years. Yet around this unchanging center, the architecture was in constant, thoughtful motion. New treasuries were built by different city-states, each one a small temple in its own right, reflecting their unique interpretations of Apollo's power and their relationship to him. The addition of a theater for poetic contests and an athletic stadium for the Pythian Games were not mere expansions, they were profound theological statements. They signaled a broadening of Apollo's domain from a god of prophecy to a patron of civilization itself, of music, poetry, and physical excellence. How did the builders manage such significant changes without breaking faith with the past? The answer lies in a deep architectural conservatism that protected the most sacred elements. The Aditon, the inner chamber where the oracle sat, was preserved through every renovation. Its location, its orientation, its very stone seat were treated as inviolable, the spiritual anchor of the entire complex. This created a powerful continuity, allowing the surrounding architecture to evolve dramatically, while the heart of the religious experience remained untouched and familiar to pilgrims who returned after many years. We can read periods of theological innovation in the sequencing of construction. A sudden flurry of new, small shrines dedicated to lesser deities around the main temple might indicate a period of theological consolidation, where a pantheon was being formally organized and its hierarchy physically expressed in stone. Conversely, the complete rebuilding of a main sanctuary in a radically new style could signal a revolutionary shift in how the divine was conceived, perhaps moving from a distant, fearsome power to a more accessible, personal presence. This delicate dance between change and permanence reveals the temple not as a frozen monument, but as a participant in an ongoing conversation with the divine, its stones giving form to the eternal, evolving quest for understanding. The sacred center of the world was not a place you could move. Across continents and centuries, a single, unmoving point often anchored the entire sprawling evolution of a temple complex. This was the axis mundi, the conceptual pole around which the cosmos turned, and its preservation was the ultimate act of long-term spiritual planning. Even as outer walls were demolished and rebuilt, Even as grand new gateways stretched the boundaries of the sacred precinct, this central point remained inviolable. At Cambodia's Angkor Wat, the central tower does not merely represent Mount Meru, the home of the gods. It is understood to be Mount Meru itself. Every later addition, from the enclosing galleries to the outermost walls, was designed in relation to this fixed cosmic center, creating a stone model of the Hindu universe that grew in scale but never shifted its spiritual core. How did generations of builders, separated by hundreds of years, ensure that this symbolic center remained perfectly fixed? The methods were both simple and profound. Master surveyors would establish permanent markers, perhaps a deeply buried foundation stone or a set of sighting posts placed far beyond the construction zone. These markers created an invisible grid of sacred geometry that could be referenced again and again. A new team of builders, commissioned by a king 5 generations later, would use these same fixed points to orient their work, ensuring that the new structure continued to honor the original cosmic alignment. The very layout of the complex often radiated from this center like ripples in a pond. The most sacred spaces clustered closest to the axis mundi, while more public or administrative buildings were placed further out in the concentric rings of the cosmic diagram. This hierarchical spatial relationship was a physical expression of a spiritual truth, that one moved from the mundane periphery toward the divine center. When a complex needed to expand, planners faced a critical choice. They could not simply build outward in any direction. They had to extend the cosmic model itself. This often meant adding new, larger enclosure walls that maintained the same geometric relationship to the central axis, effectively creating a new, larger version of the universe in stone. The consistency of these cosmic references reveals what was truly non-negotiable in ancient planning. The practicalities of construction, the whims of kings, even the evolution of artistic styles, all had to bend to the imperative of preserving the connection between heaven and earth. This unwavering focus transforms our understanding of these sites. We begin to see them not as random collections of beautiful buildings, but as deliberate, functioning cosmograms, where every new corridor and courtyard was a conscious act of cosmic creation, a testament to a vision of the universe so powerful it could guide a civilization's hand for 1,000 years. The land itself was the first architect. Long before any human hand carved a stone, the contours of a hill, the presence of a natural spring, or the strange shape of a rock outcrop whispered the initial blueprint. Planners listened to these geological whispers, weaving their temples into the very fabric of the earth in a sacred collaboration between human ambition and divine creation. At Turkey's ancient site of Göbekli Tepe, this relationship is stunningly clear. The world's oldest known temple complex was not built upon a blank slate, but was carefully fitted around existing, towering limestone pillars that rose naturally from the hilltop. The earliest builders carved their iconic T-shaped monoliths in direct conversation with these natural formations, and for generations, every new, circular enclosure was positioned in deliberate sequence to honor this powerful geological foundation. The entire development of the site was a response to the hill itself, its structures emerging from the rock as if they had always been waiting there. This was a universal principle. A distinctive, lone peak on the horizon might become the focal point for an entire temple's axis, its silhouette mirrored by a man-made pyramid. A hidden cave, believed to be an entrance to the underworld, would be enclosed within a shrine, becoming the spiritual heart around which courtyards and halls would slowly accumulate over centuries. The sequencing of construction often followed the logic of the topography itself. Builders would first develop the most spiritually charged geological features, consecrating the natural spring or the sacred grove, and only then would they plan the sequence of walls and gates that would gradually frame and protect these holy sites. How did ancient surveys account for such permanent features? The initial planning of a complex involved a deep reading of the land, an understanding of its stable bedrock and its erosion-prone slopes. A master planner, knowing that a temple must stand for 1,000 years, would choose a building site not just for its celestial alignment, but for its solid geological footing, avoiding areas susceptible to landslides or flooding. This dialogue between the built and the natural created a profound harmony. A processional pathway might be deliberately routed to crest a small hill, revealing a breathtaking view of the main temple at the perfect moment in the pilgrim's journey. The preservation of certain rock formations within the temple walls, left completely untouched by tools, shows that these were not seen as obstacles to be cleared, but as sacred entities in their own right, divine creations that human artistry was meant to complement, not conquer. This deep integration reveals a planning philosophy that saw no separation between the sanctuary and the world around it. The temple was not an imposition upon the landscape, but a graceful and intentional extension of it, a partnership between generations of builders and the eternal earth they called home. These ancient blueprints for eternity are not lost artifacts, they are a living legacy. The very principles that guided multi-generational temple projects now offer a powerful lens for rethinking our own modern architectural challenges. At a time when urban sprawl and disposable construction often dominate, the ancient emphasis on master planning provides a compelling alternative. It is a philosophy that prioritizes long-term resilience over short-term gain, suggesting that the most enduring structures are those conceived as the first chapter in a story meant to be continued by others. Contemporary thinkers like Christopher Alexander have championed this very idea, drawing inspiration from traditional towns and temples that grew organically. He argued for a design process that creates a coherent whole through a sequence of small, adaptive acts, much like the slow, deliberate layering of a temple complex. This is not a call to copy ancient styles, but to rediscover their underlying wisdom. The ancient balance between fixed principles and flexible adaptation is a masterclass in sustainable urban development. A modern city district, for instance, could be founded on a non-negotiable framework of green corridors, primary transportation axes, and community nodes, a sacred geometry for our time. Within that stable structure, individual buildings could then evolve, change use, or be replaced over decades without fracturing the overall harmony of the neighborhood. How might this address our current crisis of placelessness? The integration of profound symbolic meaning with rigorous practical function in sacred architecture points toward an answer. Ancient temples were not just buildings, they were cosmological maps and psychological journeys. Modern architecture often struggles to create spaces that feel truly meaningful, that resonate on a level deeper than mere utility. The lesson is not to build temples to forgotten gods, but to thoughtfully embed layers of meaning, whether through connections to local history, natural landscapes, or communal narratives, into our hospitals, schools, and public squares. This approach transforms a space from a mere container for activity into a place that actively nourishes the human spirit. The ancient challenge of sourcing materials locally and managing resources for the long term speaks directly to our modern pursuit of sustainability. A temple built from stone quarried 1,000 miles away was the exception, not the rule. Most great complexes relied on a deep understanding of their immediate environment, using local materials and designing systems for water, energy, and waste that were integrated and regenerative. This holistic view, where every element from the foundation to the roof is part of a single, interdependent system, is precisely the kind of thinking required to build a sustainable future. By looking back at these age-old sequences, we find a timeless blueprint for creating a world that is not just built to last, but designed to be cherished and built upon by generations yet to come. These grand structures are a testament to a vision that looks beyond the horizon of a single human life. They represent humanity's most profound attempt to build a bridge between our fleeting temporal world and the enduring realm of the spiritual, using architecture as the language for that conversation. We have walked through the silent language of sacred geometry, the celestial alignments etched in stone, and the immense logistical feats of moving mountains of rock. We have seen how political ambition, evolving rituals, and the very earth itself all played their part in a coordinated effort that spanned countless generations. Each of these threads reveals a sophisticated form of long-term thinking, a master plan flexible enough to adapt yet strong enough to hold a vision for 1,000 years. These temples do not stand as isolated monuments, but as living conversations between centuries. Each generation added its own voice, its own architectural verse, while carefully respecting the sacred chorus of all who came before. To decode their planning sequences is to recover a powerful reminder that our very greatest achievements often demand a vision that transcends our own individual lifetimes. The next time you stand before an ancient sacred site, I encourage you to see it with these new eyes. Look past the weathered stones and see the dynamic narrative, the unfolding story of human aspiration written across the ages. It is a story that continues to speak to us, asking what we are building for a future we trust others to complete. I would love to hear which temple complex's development story most captivates your imagination. Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe to continue exploring history's greatest mysteries together.